Thank you. Thank you very much, Charmian. Yeah, I'm really sorry I'm not going to talk about any of the things Charmian said I'm going to talk about. Because, yeah, we can talk about the activism and campaigning if people want in the discussion, but what I wanted to do is give you a presentation about the key arguments that you might encounter if you're trying to stop a housing development, about why that building development must go ahead. Yeah, and I'm going to go through some of the arguments people give for why we must have new building developments and what I think are really the important responses to that. Not just from an environmental point of view, but from the view that, well, there is a huge amount of housing needs, not just in this town, but across the country. There's people living in terrible conditions and people with no home at all. So I'm coming at it from both of those, with both of those hats. And what I'm going to try and convince you, and we can see how far I get, is that actually, you know, people say there's this contradiction between we need to provide housing and we need to protect our environment. I'm going to argue really that the needs of protecting our environment are incompatible with housing, but really with housing that's driven by profit, housing for profit. That's the incompatibility. That in actual fact, meeting housing needs and protecting our environment and dealing with climate crisis actually have the same solutions. They're not in contradiction at all. They're the same solutions that we need to fight for. So, why do we need to build new housing? This is what I think are usually what you're going to hear. First one is fairly easy to debunk, I think, but you still hear it said, new houses are way more environmentally sustainable than all these old, leaky houses that we have around the place. If we just got rid of all them and built new ones, we'd crack on and deal with the climate crisis. That's not true. And I am going to come back and explain why it's not true, don't worry. So, secondly, we have a shortage of housing. That seems obvious because people are in housing need. It's not true. Thirdly, and I've got number one on all of them, I don't know why, more housing reduces, because if we want people to have houses, we need to build more houses to bring down the price of housing. That's the biggest lie of all. 3, what is the real reason to build new housing? Why is the government so keen that we build loads of houses everywhere? It's new housing creates economic growth, investment opportunities and profits. Some people think that's a good idea. Some people think that sounds great if we can have everything. Maybe that's a good idea, but I would like you to think about, and in this process of this presentation, who really benefits from that, and what is the cost of economic growth driven by build, build, build mentality. And that brings me to my fourth myth, which is that, and the government love this one, we need private developers to build houses and we need private landlords because we don't have any public money to deal with housing or the climate crisis. So that's just, and I think that's not true either. Right, so myth 1, new houses are more sustainable. There's this great quote, I'm sure Alice is going to use it as well. The greenest building is the one that already exists. All right, so the new buildings will be more sustainable if you look at the criteria that they use to decide whether a building is energy efficient, costs less to heat, uses less energy to heat. New buildings will be better than old buildings. But that's only in terms of the operational greenhouse gas emissions, right? The emissions of heating and lighting. What that doesn't take into account, and the new future home standards, for instance, that we're going to get gas boilers and stuff next year, which are, going to improve the standards of new buildings, they don't take this into account at all. Embodied carbon, the greenhouse gas emissions in the bricks, the steel, the glass, all of the materials that go into making that building, or demolishing the one that was already there, or creating the foundations with deep steel, concrete piles and all that kind of stuff. None of that is counted when they say how green these new buildings are, and that's just ridiculous, right? Because that's 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions in any new building is the upfront building it now, not 50 years over the lifespan of the building, how much less emissions will be used to heat it over 50 years. Now, right now, when we desperately need to be cutting our emissions is when all this upfront carbon is being spent on new buildings. So, and construction is 10% of our overall UK carbon emissions. So this is a really energy intensive process, building new housing. And I think the other thing, is when you see about new houses being net zero, always be really mindful that you can claim something is net zero if you just bung a bit of money to the council in an offset payment, because that's a perfectly legitimate way to describe a building as net zero, is to say, well, it's going to do all these emissions, but we'll give £60 per tonne of emissions to the council, and that cancels out. And most people will be aware that actually the climate doesn't care about money, right? That the greenhouse gas emissions actually are creating climate change because of the emissions, not because of how much they cost. Anyway, so I'm hoping I'm going to get through all of these. And of course, then there's all the other, so I'm just talking about the carbon emissions, environmental impact of new construction. I haven't even touched on all the stuff which I guess you were talking about this morning, about the other environmental impacts of construction, like sand, for instance. Did you know that the sand that we need to create glass is not just any old sand that you can get from the desert, right? It's particular needs sand for construction, and it's literally running out, right? So there's these huge resource implications and so on in just building rather than using what we've already got. And I'm caveating all that with, you can have sustainable building that's much more sustainable, using renewable materials, reducing the amount of materials that you use, or not using concrete, hempcrete. There's all kinds of interesting work being done to create more renewable, sustainable materials to build new houses that we do need. But our building regulations don't ask for any of those, right? So we would need massively higher standards of environmental standards for new buildings to really start talking about sustainable construction. And then the key point really is, no matter how green the new housing is, it's not how we're going to make the building sector of the economy sustainable, because of this. Only 40% of our homes in this country right now are rated at a C level of energy, which is, not hugely energy efficient. But that means 60% is lower than that. It's D, E, F. It's just leaking energy all over the place. That's 29 million homes in the UK that need to be retrofitted by 2050 to meet existing targets for reducing energy emissions, so carbon emissions. So, even with the best will in the world, if every new house was way more sustainable, it's not going to replace 29 million existing homes. The way we're going to deal with that is to retrofit. Right, myth 2, we have a shortage of housing. So I've just put a load of statistics here that show we don't. We have over 1 million empty homes in this country. 500,000 of those are second homes that people don't rent out. So they just live there on a weekend now and again, or for a few weeks in the summer. Completely luxury consumption of a vital social necessity. So then the rest are unused completely, just empty and not used at all, or holiday lets, which we count as empty homes because they're not being used as a home. Yeah, they're just this is empty homes being used as a holiday let. So it doesn't count like houses, things that are actually built to be holidays, like caravan, mobile homes or something, right? So not, we can have holiday homes for holiday homes, but this is real homes that somebody could be living in, being used as a holiday home, Airbnbs and so on. We have an increasing number of homes per person. So this statistic describes how in this country, so you might be thinking, well, we have more houses, but the population is going up, right? We have one dwelling for every 3 people back in 1971. By 2024, we have one dwelling for every 2.25 people. So there is more homes per person as well, and more space for those people. Overall, every 10 years in the census, they measure how many rooms people have in their homes. And our number of rooms per person is 1.8 rooms per person, and the OECD average is 1.6. So we're not particularly overcrowded, like overall, on average. We've got a lot of space and a lot of houses. But what is going on with those? Some people have lots of houses, and other people have very, very little. So it's an issue of distribution. This is an issue of inequality. This is an issue about people. I don't know if you've seen this, I love it. It's not a housing crisis, it's a hoarding crisis. Some people are hoarding the houses and the rooms for themselves, and that trajectory, that over time, is getting worse. So in 1991, the richest 10% of people had about 3 times more rooms per person than the poorest 10%. By 2011, it was 5 times. So rich people are having their big extensions, and they're going up into the attic, and they're going into the basement, and they're extending their homes, and they've got shed loads of living space, and the poorest people are being shoved into smaller and smaller, overcrowded, substandard accommodation. The number of extra houses that we have is again going up. 2001, and it's accelerating. Look at this gap between 2019 and 2021. We added on an extra 200,000 surplus homes above the number of the population, how the population is rising, right? So more dwellings than households being formed. Because sometimes people think, well, people are breaking into more households, more families are breaking down, so you've got 2 households, with children needing to live in 2 households and so on. But even taking that into account, this is how many more dwellings than there are than households, and it now stands at 1.4 million. And then, of course, you need to balance that to understand this is what's rocketing as well. 178,000 households were homeless this year in the country, and that was a 12% increase from just the year before. This is really terrifying levels of inequality in terms of access to those homes. What am I doing for time, Shannon? Oh. Okay, rattle through, keep going more. Right, so that's on. So that's myth 3 we're on to. If people can't afford houses, they can't get houses, poor people can't get houses, surely the solution is we build loads and then the prices will drop and everybody will get more equal access to housing. I'm sorry, that's not true. That's just not how it works. Because we have been building more houses than households, which I've already gone through all the statistics to show you. But that is running alongside a massive increase in the average prices. So I've got a bunch of statistics here again to show you how that works. In the 3 years 18 to 21, we built 200,000 more households, or more houses than we had increase in households, but the average prices still went up by 14%. Is that just a short-term blip because of COVID? No. Between 2000 and 2022, the average cost of housing rose by 314%. And remember, in this time, we doubled the number of extra houses we had above the number of households. We doubled the number of houses, and we tripled the cost of housing. So there's no correlation at all between increasing the amount. And is it just because we're building them in the wrong place? People will say, ha, but if all these empty homes are up in the north of England where nobody wants to live, then, not meaning that nobody wants to live in the north of England, but there is definitely more demand in certain parts of the country. That was a really bad mess up today. Anyway, the point is that in the places where people want to live, such as London, we are still building way more houses than new households are being formed in London, twice as many new homes as new households in the 10 years between 2012 and 2022. And still, the average property values in London went up by 76%. And that's an average. Is it that the houses in Kensington, where there's not much space and it's hard to get planning permission and you can't really build new houses there, is that where the prices were rocketing, that's skewing the average? No, it's out in Barking and Dagenham, where they've been throwing up these crappy high-rise box flats at a rate of knots in this period, and the price was rocketing, 115% increase in the price of those properties over that 10-year period. So the thing that you hear, supply and demand level out, there's a higher supply, lower demand, prices fall, that doesn't work with housing. How does it actually work? Is house prices rise with the supply of money and credit to buy houses, not related to the supply of housing, okay? That's why house prices go up. So if you give people easier access to mortgages and you allow people to borrow more money, then they earn 4 times, 5 times, 6 times. You keep deregulating how much people can get into debt, that frees up more money, which makes it easier. More people can pay more for their houses, and that's how it goes up. And actually, housing works in the opposite way. The more houses go up and people see that houses go up and always go up, the more of a sure investment it is, the more attractive it is to put your money into housing, because you might be paying stupid money for your flat, but if you know that it goes up 10% every year, then you kind of think, well, it's all right to get into debt for 700 grand mortgage for a 3-bedroom flat, you know, because that's crazy, right? But people do it because if it's going to be worth 750,000 in 5 or 6 years' time, you kind of think, well, that's a good investment. I'm paying money in, but it's going to work. So we now have 1 in 21 people in this country who are landlords. Why is that? Is it because people don't really think they're going to have a pension or a country is going to look after them when they get old? And does it seem like a very safe bet to put your money into a house and have somebody else basically pay rent to create your pension security? On an individual level, I can understand why that makes sense for people. On a social level, it's absolutely disastrous because housing becomes an investment, a commodity, and not what its real function should be, somewhere for somebody to live. So, and the outside investors, you know, can see this, right? So this is a statistic I found. I don't know what it is overall, but I think that gives you an indication. In 2 years, between 2014 and 2016, 13% of all homes bought in London were bought by overseas investors. So when you hear about all these flats down in Vauxhall where there's no lights at night, it's because London property is a sure bet. You can buy it, leave it sitting there, and if you've got loads of money that you just need to shove somewhere, and you're not sure about inflation or whatever, buying a flat in London is just like buying a gold bar and leaving it in the bank because you can sell it at any time for more. So it's a complete, this is how, and almost half of all bank assets in the UK are tied up in property. And this is why I want to kind of really make people understand, when the government says we want to build more houses to bring down prices, they're lying, right? Because they will do everything to stop house prices falling. The whole economy is based on house prices never falling, right? Banks would fail left, right, and centre if house prices started falling. That's what happened with the subprime mortgage crash in 2008, and the whole world economy was brought to its knees because housing can't fall, right? So they would do pretty much anything to make sure it doesn't happen. And we see that, like, right from the 80s onwards, the deregulation of the mortgage market, as I explained, that came with the Thatcher era, which continues to this day, to the Help to Buy scheme, where the government puts in loads of money to help people get bigger and bigger mortgages, and the stamp duty reductions. When there was a little blip during COVID where people weren't going to be able to buy houses, what did the government do? They panicked and said, we'll cut stamp duty, please keep buying houses, please don't let house prices fall. So when they say they want house prices to fall, like, yeah, I can't find the evidence for that. And I love this graph. This comes from the Financial Times, so you know it's true. so this is a graph of Persimmons, which is one of the big house builders, and it's their own graph for their own reports, internal report, which an article in the Financial Times when they were looking at the outcome of the long-term effects of the Help to Buy scheme. I don't know if anybody has come across this. This is where the government gives money to first-time buyers. It's ended now, but they give money to first-time buyers where they guaranteed a section of their deposit so that they could then afford a mortgage which they wouldn't otherwise have been able to get, okay? So it poured billions of public money into guaranteeing loans to people who wouldn't otherwise have been able to borrow that money. And this graph I'll explain to you. So this is the cost of the houses to the public. So say that's about 170 grand is the average of what they were selling the houses for. And after 10 years, it's up on 240,000. So that's this massive house price inflation that we were talking about earlier. But look where the cost, how it breaks down. This bit at the bottom is the bit of the cost of the house that is accounted for by the cost of the land that it's on. And that stays fairly stable, even looks like it's going down a bit towards the end. The middle bit is the cost of the actual building, so the building materials, the labour, the cost that Persimmons had to pay out to build these new houses. And this and that stayed fairly stable as well, a little bit going up at the end. This massive increase in the blue at the top is gross profit, right? So this is where Help to Buy kicks in here, and where their profit levels are kind of staying stable. As soon as Help to Buy comes in, all it does is inflate the market so people can pay more per house, and all of it goes into Persimmon's pocket. So you've got direct subsidy from government funding into the pockets of Persimmons to help lots of people who couldn't otherwise buy a house, but they got it at a massively inflated price and to the benefit of and a huge debt that they're in for the rest of their lives. And Persimmons were the ones who benefited. So that's how house prices work. So what's the solution to the housing and climate emergency? I really believe you can't look at it just as an environmental or planning issue. This is about the way the whole thing works. Housing must be taken out of the market. We have to stop treating housing like a commodity and treat it as what it is, a right, a public necessity for everybody to have a home. And how you could do that, I'm sure we could go into lots of the mechanisms of how that would happen, but you need a massive public investment to redistribute homes fairly. We're seeing a little bit of that in Hastings, where they're spending millions to buy houses on the private market to use them for temporary accommodation in Hastings. That really needs to happen on just a massive scale. All those empty homes, all those second homes, we need to bring them into the public sector to provide secure social homes for people. That you immediately don't need to build new houses if you meet housing need by changing ownership of the existing houses. Do you see what I mean? It's straightforward redistribution question. Massive public investment to upgrade existing homes. As I said, again, the idea that you leave it to the market or leave it to individual people to try and insulate their homes, put solar panels on, do heat pumps, it's never going to happen. Private landlords are never going to invest in this. Individual people, many of them can't afford it. We need that massive public investment. And if that means that people, move into the social sector as become tenants, where that can be funded and paid for collectively, public money, we would all be much better off. Democratic control of planning to meet housing needs and protect the environment. And I think that's the underlying thing, is that the planning about where we build, what we build, if we have to build, let it be for social good, let it be the things we really need to build, and how do we make those decisions? We must be able to make them democratically. At the moment, the planning process is driven by the imperatives of the private sector, who must be allowed to build. It's very difficult to challenge them, because the presumption is that we need them to build, and therefore you have to find a reason not to, as opposed to the other way around. As a community, as a collective, as a society, what do we want to build? Do we need to build at all? Do you know what I mean? Those questions are never asked in the planning process, because it's not starting from the democratic sort of needs of any local community. Myth 4, can't afford any of this. Well, we can, because, and I'm not going to even go into how we've got money for Ukraine or how we've got billions for carbon capture nonsense, right? We're not even going to go there in terms of the public money that's wasted on stuff that I wouldn't agree with. Just in housing, we're already spending billions, 70 billion to the private sector to subsidise overpriced rents for low quality housing. That's in that 5-year period, 70 billion going to payments to private landlords through rent allowance. That doesn't go into the pocket of the tenant, it goes to the landlord. So it's a direct subsidy to private landlords. And that's, just to put that in context, they spent that on private landlord subsidies at the same time that their total bill for affordable homes programme was 11.5 billion. So you can see already the public subsidy is going to the private sector. And if you had that 70 billion to buy up private sector houses and make them into social housing, imagine how that would shift the availability of homes. And the reason I put that up there is because people say, oh, we can't afford council housing, so we can't subsidise everybody's rent. Do people know that council housing is not subsidised? The reason why it's cheaper to rent a council house is because the rent reflects the true cost of housing, which is to maintain and repair and manage the housing over a period. The actual cost of those houses was borrowed, paid off, and done years ago, because that's what you can do when you build for the long term in the public sector. You borrow, you pay it back, and you maintain it over time with a steady income of rents. That's de-commodified housing, how it works, and you get cheap housing. It's not a subsidy. It's not paid for by people on an ongoing basis. Private rents are nothing to do with the cost of maintaining and refurbishing a building. They're just what you pay because it's the market rate, because that's how much a private landlord can get as a return on their investment. So it's a totally different way of working out the cost of housing. And private developers are also subsidised. They don't pay any land value tax, right? Or I'm just throwing in some of these explanations. When they build a tube line or they give planning permission, government, the value of the property, value of the land goes through the roof. The owner keeps all that value. So the value is added because we've improved the public realm, but they keep it. Do you see what I mean? So we're paying to increase the value of land for private landowners. So there's no land value tax in this country to claw back any of that increased value from the private to back to the public sector. There's no VAT on building a new property. Did you know that? If you want to build new, you don't pay any VAT. If you want to refurbish your house, you pay VAT. So again, this is such a direct subsidy to the private sector. Grants for cladding remediation. You know, all those flats that they threw up in Barking and Dagenham and then or everywhere else, and they were cladding on them, that's millions of people trapped in dangerous housing. Is the private sector paying for that? No, there's grants from the government to fix that, to help people, because every time it comes back on the public sector. And these the Affordable Homes Programme money that I mentioned up here, little and all as it is, a lot of it is going to for-profit providers and to developers to build housing and housing associations, to build housing which is not actually really affordable at all. So a huge amount of those public grants are going to make shared ownership homes or houses that are rented at 80% of market rate. You know, housing that's technically affordable, but in reality is not at all. I'm going to be finished in 1 minute, Sharon. I'm way ahead of schedule then. So I'm just touching on some of the reasons we have to be sceptical when they say there's no money, because the government is spending billions on housing, but they are funneling it towards the private sector, towards developers, in a way that doesn't actually meet housing needs and that has no requirements for this building to be sustainable or environmentally friendly or to be what the communities that they're building in actually want or need. And of course, we can afford this because we can't afford not to, because we're also paying the cost of the housing crisis, the fallout from the housing crisis. Some of the statistics, again, it's putting human misery in financial terms, but it's kind of useful to look at it in that way sometimes as well. They estimate from this is the building research. I was going to say institute, but it can't be because it's an E. Building Research Establishment in 2021, they did a report and they worked out that the cost of poor housing costs the NHS 1.4 billion every year. So that's like asthma and allergies and elderly people getting sick because they can't, because their homes are cold and damp. That is just the direct health costs. And then they reckoned the wider social impact of poor housing is 18.4 billion. So again, who's picking up the tab for people living in really poor quality housing? In terms of temporary accommodation, I put in this quote to remind myself. I went to the housing strategy meeting of the council on Thursday, and one of the people who worked in the temporary accommodation sector, I was just like, so they are the companies who rent their properties, private properties, to the council to use as temporary accommodation. And I said, why don't you rent them to people as long-term homes? Because we could solve this problem if you actually provide. These are people who are homeless because they have nowhere to live. Why don't you just give them decent, secure tenancies? Because we can't evict them quick enough. Because when you're on a long-term tenancy, it takes about 6 months to get rid of you if they don't like you, or you haven't paid your rent, or done, some things happen. That's too long if you own a property and you want a regular return. So it's much better to rent it on a nightly basis to the council, to people who are in temporary accommodation, because they're there on license, it's called. They don't have a tenancy. So if they mess up, they're just out, and there's no legal procedure at all. And that's a really nice money spinner. So this one company had 100 properties in Hastings doing that. The other company had 350. And, and the guy who worked for the company with 100, he said straight up, said, it's wrong and it's immoral. And he's right. And he knew it. He works for the company and he's not personally responsible for what they're doing, but it is wrong and it is immoral. And we're picking up the financial cost of it as well. 6.7 million is what the council's going to spend on that this year. And that's not going to homeless people. It's going to the landlords who are profiting from homeless people. Okay, so these are, and the climate crisis, of course, is its own massive financial burden on our society. The flooding, the infrastructure impacts, agriculture, health, the insurance industry going down the drain. How many people's insurance on their homes is actually underwritten by the government now because private companies won't insure them because of flood risks and so on. So we, as the public, are always the people of last resort picking up the bill for all of these problems, which are caused by this, the housing crisis and the climate crisis together, and forced migration, literally people being forced to move because of the climate crisis, making whole parts of the world uninhabitable. There isn't any solution, I'm afraid, other than us planning for this, coming together as a community, as a society, and planning how do we share the resources fairly, how do we manage these costs, these implications, and it's never, ever going to be sorted by leaving it to the market, which is inherently based on short-term gain, taking actions for profit and so on, which has with no thought to the long-term responsibilities or the implications of what they're doing. So, just going to go. That is the last slide. I just wanted to go back to the very beginning and say that's why I think leasing housing needs and protecting the environment have the same solution. I hope you agree.
That was truly amazing. I think it's opened our eyes to a lot of things going on in the background. Just one interesting observation. I don't know if you know, but in Wales, the government has now imposed 3 times the normal council tax on second homes and holiday homes. The instant effect of this was that where my sister lives, her next door neighbour, who was about to rent the extra little house on their farm property as a holiday home, rented it to the local firefighter instead and his family. So I think that's pretty interesting. Government can intervene in very different ways if they want to. So if I could just ask one of my colleagues to just double check that the hotel knows that we're having lunch at 1. Yeah, they do. Okay, great. There was a slight blip with the tea coffee being a bit late, but we're okay, are we? Yes. Oh, they'll come in and clear and put savages out. Yes. Lovely. Okay. Thank you. Do we have? I do have the statement from Julia Hilton, which I would like to read to you at some point. But first of all, do we have any immediate questions or comments for Grace? And if so, could you go over to Joe, who's got the yellow mic over there? First of all, I wanted to say I loved your passion and how much you got through, and that you should have a PhD in economics to be running the housing sector in this country. So thank you very much for all of that. And I'm not really actually sure why I'm standing up here, but I just wanted to tell you that, and I agree with absolutely everything you're saying. And as you said, there's no solution, but I just wanted to point out some points where I don't want to be shocked by saying this. A lot of people who need social housing, and this was probably, I don't want to be quoted on this, have very difficult lives, and living in certain places, they may not adhere to certain rules, which is hugely problematic. So we have caused society is living a problematic inequality problem where people are struggling to survive in many ways, and then people, as you say, you've got huge numbers of houses and stuff, use as investments, protect their own interests in an economic system that allows that, and we can't judge them for that, I don't think. However, what we do need to do is, as you say, is buy these houses back up again, put people in them, but so many people that I have experienced this personally do not respect the houses, do not live their tenancies, do all of that sort of stuff. We need to support these people as well. And this is not something you can solve, but this is a societal problem that will be changing. And unless we completely remove capitalism, as you say, from the housing equation, I don't know how we're going to solve it, but maybe Julia Hilton has some kind of answer to that. Anyway, that was just a bit of a ramble, and I should go now. Thank you. You want to reply to that?
Let's more people speak, is that right?
More people speak.
And I'll try and come back on.
Okay, Ben, would you like to, do you want to pop up here? You're nearest as well.
Okay. Thank you. That was wonderful. I've heard on the Brighton Urban Fringe about the stepping back from the kind of biodiversity argument and talking about the private communities, how like there is, housing is an imperative, but access to nature is an imperative as well. It seems like the politics and the philosophy behind it is all going in the wrong direction. What can local groups utilise? Is there any sort of policy that is based on common sense? Or, where do you turn, like a local group that's wanting to oppose a development that is going to fundamentally reduce people's access to nature and quality of their surrounds?
Yeah. Is there anyone else that wants to say anything before I've spoken a lot? Yeah, why don't...
So somebody just come to the mic and then you, okay? Yes, yeah.
Firstly, thank you, that was brilliant, so useful. Could I please don't demonise social housing tenants? Yeah, well, no, but, sorry, could I just speak? I do own my own home, St. Bennett's, so I'm a respectable person. And during the week, for the last 6 years, I've lived in a council block in East London, and my neighbours are local government officers, nurses, a trainee solicitor, a lecturer at the University of East London. Those are the kind of people who now live in social housing. And because antisocial behaviour or not behaving properly, I find no difference whatsoever between people who are leasehold and freehold and people who live in social housing.
Gentleman just behind, yeah.
You left it in limbo on Google. Just a couple of things occurred to me. One, there was Jericho Road initiative, the observer building going. They wanted to encourage people to take on the 4 power stations, right, and self-build, because then you invest people in the properties that and address all these things that are not being addressed piling in to buy to invest. Moral and reprehensible.
There's a man at the back.
I think Amanda was next, yes. Sorry, Peter, Amanda was next and then you, okay?
Yes, Councillor Amanda Johnson representing Gensing Ward. We do have a social housing crisis though, and I think we do need to get to the social housing providers and have more talks with them. And I know our council are doing that. But I think they've got a lot to answer for when we talk about insulating homes, when you walk around the estates where we've got those social housing sites, and all those people just want to be listened to. They want their homes repaired. They do live in horrible, horrible homes at the moment. This has been going on for years. I've been here nearly 20 years from London. I was driven out by the housing crisis. I had to come here. It was the cheapest place to live when I came here with my two young children, now grown up, 21 and 19. But I would say that we do need more joined up working with them. It is a crisis at the moment, and I think we need to give them more respect for where they are living and how they are living. And again, that connection to nature. Why aren't they building those places around or with green infrastructure? They can get buses to places, but integrated travel. It does need to work a lot better, and we are considering this in the local plan. We do have to get through the corporate plan first, which is important, our assets and what we've got. As a council, we're trying to save over £1 million at the moment. So we are thinking about everyone's needs, and especially the ones who don't have much. So we are talking about it, and it is serious to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, and then I think, William, did you say after Peter, yeah?
Hello, thank you for your tour de force par excellence. I think that's absolutely amazing. I think it's really difficult to be a landlord because if your tenant says doesn't want to pay the rent and the rest of it and starts trashing the place and you go through a court process, you're probably looking 1 to 2 years for eviction. And in the meantime, let's say the washing machine breaks down, you as a landlord are obliged to fix it, even though we're getting no money in. So there is that also dilemma. So not all landlords are bad landlords, if you like. But also, I think it's really hard for the council where you may get a bad tenant who trashes the place. I've seen some stuff down on our local estate where the drug dealers go in. Okay, they've got rid of them now, but the place is absolutely trashed. The houses are trashed, and therefore we have to pick up the bill as a ratepayer. So I think the only solution is to try and vote for the parties or the representatives who have some way towards the solutions. We can try local stuff, but the bigger picture, what party reflects my view about getting good social housing, and all your arguments are so valid, about why we don't need to keep building. So thank you for that. And also, I came from East London. They're not in the posh parts, but in the probably 12th quarters, I think, are in the country. And I've moved down to where I am in Hastings, which is the 13th quarters are in the country. So my Residents Association advice to me, oh, you've moved up in the world.
Thank you. William, would you like to use... Sorry, do you want to reply
No.
What I'm going to do is take William's contribution and then Grace reply, and then I'll read out Julia Hilton's statement. Yes, so we've got that.
Thank you. On the question of homelessness,
A bit closer.
one of the things I've read about is a number of Scandinavian countries are putting the problem round, recognising that people who are homeless almost certainly have mental health and other problems and difficulties. They are given housing without any condition at all, and then provided with massive support for the needs they have. Because being homeless, even a short period of time, is very dangerous. Around here we have asylum seekers who waited up to 20 years to get permission to remain. It's not surprising that they're not ill by the time you get out a small point, we did have a land trust tax back in the 60s. The Labour government brought in, I think it was called community land tax, under which 50% of the increase in value was paid to the government.
It can be done. Of course it can, yeah.
Thank you. So go back to Grace.
Okay, I'm probably not going to be able to answer every element of this, but I guess maybe if I make an analogy with housing to the health sector, it might explain why I'm thinking we need to phase out private landlordism. I'm really sorry, but it's not the way to meet housing needs, because it's like in the health sector where you have these private companies who cherry pick certain bits of the health sector, like hip replacements, right? So straightforward, provide a hip, easy, in, out, and you make money off it because you know what you're getting. But the person with the infected hip, or the problem hip, they go back into the public sector bit with the more expensive, difficult stuff, right? So what we've got is lots of private landlords who basically want to do the hip replacements, okay? They want the easy tenants. They want the people who pay every week and who have really good jobs and who are secure and who are just going to keep putting up with a 10% increase every time, every year, never complain. They want the easy hip replacement jobs, right? And the public sector has to pick up everyone else, because the thing is, everybody needs healthcare and everybody needs a home. So if so where do the people who are got health crisis, can't maintain their tenancy, whatever, where do they end up? They end up back with the council to provide, with very little support, to provide those additional supports that some people might need to live in a supported housing or halfway house if they're coming off the streets or have drug addiction. These are terrible social problems, but what we have is councils with the legal responsibility to deal with them, but none of the money, the resources, or the facilities to actually manage them at the level that we need. So that's why I'm saying, on an individual level, it sounds really great. And again, I really do think it's connected to the lack of a decent pension system and the belief that we will all be looked after in our old age, that people do kind of make sense on an individual level, sort of hoard a bit of property as a sort of safety net. But that property is not your entitlement to make lots of money off of somebody else's home. Do you see what I mean? You're individually it makes sense, but on a social level, on a public level, it's a disaster. It's a disaster. So, I'm not going to go into any more than that really, other than to say with Amanda mentioned about the social housing sector. We used to have council housing where that support for people was integrated into the housing process, and you had housing officers who could step in and help people where there was an issue, where there was overcrowding, where there was domestic abuse. You know what I mean? There's all these issues that go on in every community, in every home, and having it within the public sector, funded properly, makes life better for everybody, actually. But what we have, but all of that is breaking down. All of it is broken because of massive underfunding, and the social housing providers, it's not owned by the council anymore in Hastings. Social housing is owned by a private company, right? Or private companies, Southern Housing, Orbit. They were housing associations. People think, oh, they're charities. They're massive companies that borrow money on the open market, private money from investors. They have to satisfy those investors. They have to run a surplus every year. Their chief executives move between the private and the public sector. They're on 300 grand a year. I need people to understand, this is the sector that is responsible for our social housing. And of course, the massive shortage of social housing means that social housing becomes the housing of last resort for the people in very, very desperate need, rather than that the way housing was built when it was first built, mass building of social housing in the 50s and the 60s. This was for everybody. It wasn't for the people who were the most desperate. It was for everybody, and you didn't have this stigmatized ghettoization of huge amount of social problems in social housing estates. It's where everybody lived and everybody was able to access. Anyway, so there's loads more we could say on that, but I just want to run into the somebody else about the solutions and how we how we can intervene in this process. And so there's these big policy change demands, which we can't avoid, and I do think we should be involved in lobbying our politicians and voting for people who are interested in making these big, massive shifts that we need at a national level. But we can also be involved in changing things on a local level through direct action and protest and campaigning. I've just come from the drop-in session that we've just started running for the Hastings Housing Alliance. And it was really interesting. Met a woman who came who lives in terrible private accommodation, and she knows another family that's just about to be made homeless because the landlord wants to sell, and another family that are in temporary accommodation who are stuck in temporary accommodation, really poor quality accommodation, feeling stuck and nowhere to go. And she came to talk to us about setting up a housing co-op. And I talked to her about occupying an empty property, forcing their hand, we occupied empty property, to say, give it to us, we'll run it as a co-op, and using that activism and direct action to put public pressure on the owners of empty properties in this town to give them to people who would put them to use. And we can wrap our community arms around those families and help them get those houses into the condition that they can own, manage and sustain them themselves. So I think we need to have that approach of community networking, organising, self-action, self-activity, and putting pressure, because the first thing we'll do when we do that is say to the council, that's 2 families in temporary accommodation, we're going to take off your list, we want the money. We want you to buy that house or to give it to these families to run as a co-op, because that's how we make real the transition of putting public money into moving from empty homes, private landlordism, over to self-run, community-led housing, whether it's through co-ops, community land trusts, or the council buying them directly. So I think we can translate all these big policy changes that we want to see happening on a national level into direct action by people on the ground. So lots of other questions I haven't really answered.
We've only got about 7 minutes. And somebody there has a direct comment. Would you like to, on I can see, but it was coming up from what Grace was saying. Would you like to take the yellow mic? Yeah.
Yeah, Sonia Payton from Provost. I used to live in a short life housing property in Kilburn, and I worked from the housing estate in Hastings as well, and running education. And I support absolutely those very much what we were involved in. And it's pretty a private place, feeling control and having a voice, and having a lot of support where it was, and a lot of pride and innovation and creativity came out of the club. And we had great time. Unfortunately, that funding has been diminished, and Children's Centre was part of that, with the whole family, the generational thing. It was a very optimistic movement that was swept along by the many services. I think the other thing that I think is one is spotting light and short life housing life. I mean, children were part of short life housing, and one of the reasons we got short life housing was if you made a contribution to the community, the community in other ways that you lived in, or whether or not it was doing that housing yourself and creating some new skills and opportunities for people to use them. So spotting is not illegal. They live so much more clear, what I gather. I'm fine. I have a private house. We love the house probably. But I just wondered what the repercussions of your suggestion would be, and whether or not it's likely that some of those.
Thank you. I'm just going to take a moment now because I do want you to hear this statement from Julia Hilton, because I think it's important that we know where the council stands at the moment. So Julia said she wanted to come today, but she said, as I live close to Sandrock Bends, which is one of the green areas on the trek, I've been advised by our monitoring officer that it's probably best to go to tenders. I think we seem to have a pretty issue with actually, we haven't discussed that in detail. But anyway, so she was stuck, she couldn't come. So she said, I thought some wider context for the housing need might be helpful. The timetable for the next stage of consultation on the local plan, and it's crucial that the local plan, is still being finalised. The new government's proposed changes to the planning framework won't be known in detail till December. But under current government revisions, local housing need rises by 47%, from 490 to 722 homes per annum. That's what the council is now expected to produce, 722 homes per annum. Our local plan can only meet 30% of the earlier figure. There are 565 households in temporary accommodation, over 1,500 households on the waiting list for social rent homes. So that's altogether over 2,000 households. Currently, there are approximately 800 empty houses in the borough, and we are keen to see an empty homes officer post to start to tackle that. However, it is highly unlikely we would manage to bring them all into use. Other councils who have an empty homes officer manage on average 5 to 10 houses a month, so maybe 100 a year. We can densify existing housing sites, look at building on car parks and opportunity sites, but that will still result in a shortfall of homes needed. So we really need creative thinking to avoid pressure to develop green spaces. I hope the meeting comes up with some creative ideas about how we address the desperate need for housing while protecting our green spaces. The consultation on our housing strategy started this week with 2 big meetings with lots of different people invited, and Grace referred to the fact that she was yesterday. The intention is to have this work, housing strategy, completed and adopted by June 2025. So that's all very interesting, and I'm going to ask Grace to take a few minutes maybe to comment on that, and then we'll be having lunch, so I'll explain that. But in terms of creative thinking to avoid pressure to develop green spaces, obviously Grace has been suggesting a lot of ideas that the council could be taking up, but also we do have the possibility of a follow-on from this meeting in terms of a people's assembly, which would involve many people, anyone in Hastings who wanted to come and help to develop ideas about these issues. So that might be another possibility. So I'll just ask Grace, I think, to comment on if you have any comments on what Julia has said, and then we'll have to wrap up the session. So I apologise to anyone else who wants to ask a question, but ask Grace. If you want to see it.
No, I've read the comment. I'm not sure any comments specific. I mean, like I think the council's in a, is in this strange situation as they have these legal obligations to look after people who are homeless, and none of the resources or the facilities to do it. So, I think that we can play our role in campaigning and protesting that put pressure not just on the council, but via that pressure onto the national government about what kind of shift we need to see. I think we've had various conversations with the council at different times about how constrained they feel by the rules and regulations, by the planning system in terms of what they can do, and of course their massive underfunding. But yes, the person who asked about squatting, the thing is there's the law that says property is sacrosanct. We mustn't ever do anything to interfere with private property, but because it's so glaringly wrong and immoral. What we found is that we occupy empty properties to protest, and they don't arrest us, let alone charge us with anything. It's only technically illegal, like we occupied the 53 empty flats in Clifton Court to open them up, owned by a housing association. We've just left them sit there. We opened them up and allowed architects to come in and look at them and say that these could be lived in. We're using that as a pressure point to try to get them to refurbish those flats. Nobody challenged us on the legality of doing that because it's so glaringly wrong what they're doing. And I think there's a lot of scope for us to do action which you know, I say technically it's illegal to squat a private residential building, but I think it's quite clear when we're going in, we're doing it with an agenda that is about improving and housing people, and it's a protest. We have a right to protest still in this country, so it comes under that. We have a right to protest in a proportionate way. So the longer term thing of squatting residential buildings, people moving into a building to live in it, is very, very difficult. It is illegal. People can be arrested for it, and so have to think about the logistics of that. Squatting commercial properties is still wide open. You can, so it's got an empty shop or a building which has never been used as a residential property. That's fair game. You have to squat that, and then it's still a civil matter that they have to bring you to court to ask you to leave and get an eviction order rather than a criminal matter. So there's lots of options around that, and we're in Housing Rebellion. We would love to talk to people who want to go down that route and get involved in these kind of actions with us, because I do think it's part of that we need to do this for ourselves. We need to show the way forward, and not wait for the council to fix things for us as well. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So yes, anybody who wants to get involved in that kind of proactive campaigning and direct action, love to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. I think we've already given Grace a big hand. I think we could give her another one. Thank you so much. So something that is going to happen over lunch hour is that we are going to be taking a picture with a banner that Amanda has brought about the Climate and Nature Bill, which is something that we very much want to support and hope that you will as well. Jane is going to say something about that now. There's also, I think, a sign-up sheet at the back or a way to contact Zero Hour, which is a campaign supporting the Climate and Nature Bill. So I hope as many people as possible, if you haven't already just done the automatic letter to Helen O'Donoghue or whoever your MP is, it's very easy to do about that, or your organisation to say you want to back this bill. So Jane will say something about that now, and very quickly, and then we will have a photo call just before we start the afternoon session with Amanda's.
Thanks everyone. I don't think I can follow Grace's dynamism, so you'll have to bear with me. But you may have seen around the place there's little posters that say we're backing the Climate and Nature Bill. So as an organisation standing up for nature, are backing it, and it's got cross-party support, so it doesn't matter who you vote for. We've got faith leaders, businesses, organisations and individuals, and there's a little poster which I think is on the other side of that door, which tells you how many of each at the moment. As scientists, Ben and I and Trevor are really interested. There's over 1,000 scientists signing it. So, what we'd like people to do is to use the QR codes that you can see on the little posters, one on that door up there. That will take you straight to the 0 Hour website where you can sign as an individual. Oh, Mary's got one there. You can sign as an individual, and that's brilliant. We've got, I think, 52,000 people signed up so far. But if you can sign as an organisation or as a council, as a school, even if you just run a little Facebook group, if you can sign on the organisation bit, that carries much more weight. So that would be brilliant. And you can talk to me or to Amanda, who's going to take it to our council and propose the motion that the council support it as a whole. At the moment, there's 372 councils that have signed in support, so it's looking really good. We really like it because it's the first legal instrument that will take climate and nature together, because as you've heard today, you can't deal with one without the other. We need to have our natural spaces to be able to soak up flooding and to act as carbon sinks, but equally, we can't keep saying, well, we're going to save all this nature, but then climate change just rushes ahead and kills it all anyway. They've both got to work together. It's science-based. The draft was all made with scientists going in the process as they were going along, so you can be sure that it isn't just some sort of ideological thing, it's actually based on the science. Because the legislation that we have at the moment, the Environment Act 2021 that Ben mentioned and the Climate Change Act 2009, were made, they predate our commitments to get to stay below 1.5 degrees by 2050 and to protect 30% of our natural spaces, land and sea, by 2030, which will take us to the end of this government session. So we need to have them acting on it now. It also asks for a just transition globally. So that's looking at communities in this country that may work in the oil and gas industry and be transitioning and need new jobs, but bringing everybody on board, so whatever section of society you're in, and also looking at that globally, so we don't just fuel our green revolution by the extractivism and kind of colonialism that we've done to other countries over the past. And then linking in with our next stage for this particular event, as Charmian said, we're hoping then to take people and have an assembly on nature, and that's exactly one of the things that the Climate and Nature Bill asks for, so that it's not just top-down decisions saying this is what you have, it doesn't matter about your community, you've just got to live with it. It's people speaking from their experiences and their heart and giving that message upwards. So I hope that we see you all at our assembly. We haven't got a date yet because we've just got this one over the line, but we'll definitely keep in touch with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Well, sandwiches are here. I've got a note that Amanda at some point would like to let us know, Councillor Amanda Johnson, how to make sure the council hears our questions and objections. But Amanda, could I suggest that we could attach that to the afternoon session about planning applications? Because also, I'm terribly hungry. I don't think I can take in anything else. So other people may be in the same state, but we will do that. So just to let you know, the food is all, the sandwiches are all either vegetarian or vegan, apart from something which I slightly overlooked, which is tuna. So if you're pescatarian, you're right. I hope that's labelled. I think they are maybe labelled as to what they are. So if you're not vegan, if you could start on the vegetarian sandwiches, and I'm sure there'll be plenty for everybody anyway, and move on to the vegan ones following. There are also a couple of, there are, I think, about 8 gluten-free sandwiches. And there are a couple of non-bread options. So please see one of our homes at the back if you like one of those. And could I encourage you again to network, talk to someone you don't know over the Thank you, everybody.
I just realised why you wanted me to see the questions was for this, but then when you started using the other microphone, I thought, oh, that's fine.